So part one, I've entitled Everybody's an Extremist Nowadays. And they're using this word, both the government, politicians, the media are using this word extremism to describe people who merely just don't agree with them. The government even tried to define it, but couldn't. No one would agree with their definition of extremism. Religions wouldn't agree with them. So, in essence, it is a meaningless term, but they use it all the time, as you will see in today's talk. Now, a guest on my show recently stated that staged terrorism is one of the tools of statecraft in the modern era. Now, I think most people in this room, if you watch Richplanet, you'll understand what that statement means. Problem is, most people outside of this room, they don't know what that statement means. Let me spell it out. The vast majority of terrorism that we see reported in our mainstream media is not carried out by the groups that they blame it on. The vast majority of terrorism is carried out by governments and government agencies. It's as simple as that. And it's done for a variety of reasons. It may be done for internal reasons, reasons internal to the country to bring about changes in the law, or it may be done for external reasons. For example, to demonize a foreign state in order to create an excuse to take military action against that state. But we've seen a slightly different flavour of this statement recently, which is that staged hate and extremism is one of the tools of statecraft in the modern era, and you'll see that as I progress with this lecture. Now, I thought I'd give you my opinion on Brexit because it's been such a big issue over the last couple of years. This is just my opinion. I'm not expecting everyone to agree with me. Opinion and some observations. Now, I said in a previous Richplanet show that being asked to vote in the referendum was a bit like being asked, which dog turd would you like to stand in? Would you like to stand in the light brown dog turd or the dark brown dog turd? That's not a racist joke. It was just the first two turds I found with a Google search. You might think that's a bit harsh, saying something like that. Well, I don't think it is if you consider the issue of fabricated terrorism. Because if you look at the fabricated terror that's happened in the UK and in the EU, they are both extensive. So I've gone back to Lockerbie in the UK. All of these terrorist incidents have been covered, some of them in great detail on Richplanet, such as the London nail bombings, the London tube bombings, the Cumbria shootings, the Jo Cox attack, which I'm going to talk about, the Manchester Arena bombing, which I'm going to talk about later. So there's no doubt in my mind that most, if not all of these, are fabricated terrorist incidents. In other words, the public have been duped into believing who perpetrated them. And the same applies for all of these European fabricated terrorist incidents. So this is why I make that statement, that it's like being asked, which turd would you like to stand in? Because states within the EU allow it to happen, and our own state allows it to happen. So until it stops, then I will continue with this statement. But what about the issue of sovereignty? Is it fair to use the same analogy? Well, let's just consider the issue of sovereignty, because Britain has governed itself for hundreds of years, okay? So is it right that we should suddenly, over the last 30 or 40 years, start allowing another entity to make laws that it will affect everyone in this room? And I would agree that it's not right without public acceptance and a public vote. So I do agree with the principle of a referendum if laws are going to be made in Europe. So let's just think about this issue of sovereignty. It's where you draw a line around a particular part of the earth, and all of the decisions and the organization of government is done by those people inside that line without any external influence from outside. Now, I remember when the Brexit vote came through, I watched a David Icke YouTube video, and David Icke was punching the air because we left the European Union, or voted to leave the European Union. But who is the head of state of the United Kingdom? It's the Queen, isn't it? Who is a shape-shifting lizard, isn't she? according to him, right? So why would he be punching the air? Now, I don't believe that the Queen can shape-shift into a lizard, but I'm happy to accept that statement as a euphemism that she resides over a tyrannical regime that allows fabricated terrorism. The point I'm making is that it's not sovereignty that gets rid of tyranny. So North Korea would be considered a strongly sovereign nation, right? But it's also considered to be a tyrannical nation. Okay, so sovereignty does not get rid of tyranny. What prevents tyranny is transparency and truth. All right. As soon as truth disappears, democracy disappears. All right. Truth is a prerequisite of democracy, right? Because if you were being fed lies in your media and you go to cast your vote in an election and you've got a head full of lies, you're going to make the wrong decision. All right. That's why we need truth and transparency to prevent tyranny, because you can't make that right decision unless you've got the truth in front of you. So as soon as truth disappears, democracy immediately disappears with it, right? And by regaining our sovereignty is not a guarantee to get rid of tyranny, right? The two are mutually exclusive. I'm not against living in a world which is full of states that are sovereign states, right? Which is what a lot of people want in the UK. But I'm just pointing out that that doesn't get rid of tyranny in the world. Let me give you a simple example of where transparency exposed a tyranny. In Portugal, in their criminal law, when they run a criminal investigation, all right, after so many years after that case is finished, the police files, all of the investigative files, are put into a library, and the public can go and view them. They can download those police files, all right? So I think that increases the standard of policing in Portugal, because anyone can go and examine an investigation. We don't have that in the UK, all right? So what happened with the Madeleine McCann case, that was a tyranny, i.e. the UK running a cover-up in a foreign nation, and it was only exposed when the Portuguese released their files and everyone could see the Portuguese police investigation. And if you've watched my films, you will know that the Madeleine McCann is a huge cover-up. But it's a cover-up that wasn't being run by the Portuguese, because they have a transparent criminal system. It was a cover-up that they tried to run from another country, and they succeeded by leaning on the Portuguese government, right? So whichever system we have, whether we continue to live in sovereign nations, or whether we go to a European government or a world government, right? The point is, tyranny is only challenged if we have transparency and truth, okay? Now, what was the reason why the Brexit referendum happened? This is the official reason. I don't state this as the real reason. On the 23rd of January 2013, under pressure from many of his MPs and from the rise of UKIP, David Cameron announced that a Conservative government would hold an in or out referendum on EU membership before the end of 2017. Now, the key word in that statement, I think, is under pressure. He was under pressure. It states there he was under pressure from UKIP and some of his own party. Now, I would argue that those people in UKIP, or some of them, and in his own party, were aligned with the City of London Corporation, that some of that pressure was coming from that entity, which I need to explain a little bit about. So the City of London Corporation, I'm not talking about London Town, I'm talking about the square mile, which is where all of the financial business is done, where the banking industry resides. The richest people in the world work there, all right? Now, the thing about the City of London is that over the centuries, right, and it does go back a long way, it has negotiated concessions with the British Parliament. So there are laws that apply to you and me about, for example, if we make a profit in our enterprise, you must tell the government how much money you're making, otherwise you go to prison for tax evasion. The same laws don't apply in this square mile, because the City of London Corporation, as I say, has negotiated concessions, and there are certain laws to do with financial transparency that do not apply to the City of London Corporation. So this tiny little square in the centre of London is effectively an offshore tax haven right in the middle of London. And it has a lot of power within Parliament as well. They even have their own seat in Parliament. Their seat is called the Remembrancer. So there's a guy who sits in front of the Speaker of the House, and he is representing the City of London Corporation, and it's his job to make sure that Parliament don't get rid of any of the concessions that the City of London Corporation have gained. All right? So it's a huge loophole. It's a tax loophole, if you like. It's ran for a long time, and it needs to be gotten rid of, because it means that people who work there are operating to a different law to the rest of us. Some people consider the City of London Corporation a different country to the rest of the UK. And these tax havens are connected to other tax havens which are offshore in the Crown dependencies. So there's a whole world network of tax havens where the richest people in the world put their money so that they don't have to pay tax. Now, the European Union are well aware of all of this, and they are a very new government compared to our, you might call it, quirky government with these concessions that have been bought over the years. So they just see the City of London as some sort of, well, or the arrangements that it has managed to negotiate, they see that as just antiquated. It needs to be gotten rid of. So the European Union have made it quite clear that they want to get rid of all of the British tax havens. Now you might say, well, no, the EU is not responsible for collecting tax. It doesn't set tax rates. That's true, but just consider this from the EU's own website. It says the EU does not have a direct role in collecting taxes or setting tax rates. The amount of tax each citizen pays is decided by their national government, along with how the collected taxes are spent. The EU does, however, oversee national tax rules in some areas, particularly in relation to EU business and consumer policies, to ensure businesses in one country don't have an unfair advantage over competitors in another, and taxes don't discriminate against consumers, workers or businesses from the other EU countries. So that right there gives the EU the power to be able to get rid of British tax havens. And they've made it perfectly clear that that's what they want to do. They've drawn up new legislation on tax which would do just that. So this new anti-tax avoidance package from the European Union was implemented in January this year. And if it was implemented in Britain, it would probably bring an end to the billions of pounds that are lost in uncollected taxes due to people hiding money in tax havens. And this would not happen in the UK, this kind of legislation, right? Due to the City of London's power over Parliament. My opinion is that Britain should get rid of the tax havens themselves. We should do it ourselves without help from the European Union. But it seems that we've got this parasite in the City of London Corporation which has got too much influence over our Parliament, so it can't do it itself. And I don't think it's any surprise that the main players who are pushing for Brexit are former City of London Corporation employees who are mega rich. They might be doing what you want by getting us out of the EU, but I don't think they're doing it on your behalf. I think they're working on the behalf of the City of London Corporation. Here's an article from the Express recently which said that Brexit Britain will be a huge tax haven in the middle of Europe and the UK will prosper. Well, who will prosper? Mega rich people will avoid tax. That's what it means. I don't see the people of the UK necessarily prospering. If we've got tax rules, the taxes need to be fair. I'm all for having a low tax economy, right? But the taxes need to be the same for everyone. And Parliament was going to address this issue. It was all planned for the 4th of March. The time was set in order to debate the issue of tax haven transparency. But it was pulled at the last minute. And this was very unusual for this to happen. I believe this was probably influenced from the City of London to get this debate pulled, because if the debate had gone ahead, it would have been clear, right, at this sensitive time of Brexit, that the solution to the tax haven issue can only be solved by Europe and by the European Union. That's not me making a pro-European stance, by the way. I'm just saying that's how it seems to be. Europe has said that they will end the British tax havens. So why is Brexit proving so difficult to get through? I mean, it was just delayed the other day. And in a nutshell, you've just got to look at how MPs said they would vote before the referendum. So this was a survey in 2016 of all MPs, how they were going to vote in the referendum. 480 wanted to remain. So 74% of MPs are Remainers. Right? So that, in a nutshell, is why we still haven't left the European Union, despite the referendum. And let's look at the two leaders that have presided over this. Firstly, David Cameron. Well, we're led to believe he was a Remainer. But just listen to what he says here. He's, in this quote here, he's campaigning to stay in the European Union. This is just before the Brexit referendum.
If we want to vote to leave this organisation, let's vote to leave it. But let's not do it on the basis of three things that are completely untrue.
So he said, if we want to vote to leave this organisation, let's vote to leave it. But let's not do it on the basis of three things that are completely untrue. Now let's imagine that he said that when campaigning in a general election for the Conservative Party. It would sound like this. If we want to vote to elect a Labour government, let's vote to elect it. But let's not do it on the basis of three things that are completely untrue. So that tells me that David Cameron was probably not a Remainer. I think he was, I feel that he knew all along he was going to fall on his sword after a referendum. And I suspect he was under influence from the City of London when he made the decision to hold a referendum. Because that statement there is similar to what the City of London wants. It wants to be out of any EU tax legislation, but it wants to retain its markets in Europe. Let's have a look at Theresa May. So this is 2016 when she makes this particular statement.
It's a question of what is best for Britain's future. And I think if we look at the challenges we will face, the challenges of security, of trade and the economy, that actually looking ahead, Britain's prosperity, the opportunities for people living here in the UK will be more secure, will be better if we're inside the European Union.
He asks me about the government's position on the European Union. Well, it's very simple. We want to deliver on the road to the British people. That means that we will bring back control of our laws, our borders and our money.
So she did a 180-degree U-turn. So I believe that Theresa May is a Remainer. And that, I think, explains why we haven't left. Why would you choose someone who is a Remainer to go to the European Union and negotiate leaving? That is like putting a vegetarian in charge of an abattoir, is it not? Why would you choose her? So we've got the European Union don't want Britain to leave. We've got the person doing the negotiating doesn't want to leave. And we've got 74% of MPs don't want to leave. What a surprise, we haven't left. But I think Theresa May's role is very much a compromise character. This is what I think they're trying to do at the Home Office. They just want a fudge, a compromise to try and carry Brexit through, but without any of the extremes. And our other role, I think, has been to try and hold the Conservative Party together. Because what we've seen in Brexit, we have seen bits breaking off the main political parties. Now, I think that's a good thing that's come out of Brexit, right? It's a one good thing that's come out of it, that we're seeing the major political parties breaking up into smaller bits. I would smash them all up and break them up into 100 pieces and start from scratch. We might get some honesty and truth in our political parties. But it's a nightmare for the Home Office and the security services when you have new parties springing up, because they haven't been infiltrated, right? They've got the main political parties compromised and infiltrated, right? New political parties come along, that's a nightmare for the security services, and I think that's what her role has been during Brexit. So have both sides been playing fair? Let's consider this Northern Ireland border issue just for a second, because we've heard MPs saying this over and over again, that if we leave the EU without remaining in the single market or in a customs union, that there will need to be border checks on goods in Northern Ireland because of the different tariffs. And that's suddenly going to make terrorism happen again. I think, well, really? Why would it? And just as MPs were discussing this, lo and behold, we get a terrorist attack on the border in Northern Ireland. So this was in January this year, just as MPs were talking about that issue. And Derry is right on the border. So just consider that and ask yourself, well, okay, is this a resurgence of the old troubles in Northern Ireland, or has this been done because of Brexit, right? My money would be on the latter, right? I think this is it's almost a threat where what's being stated is that, well, you need to stay in the EU and accept these reforms, otherwise you might get a bit of this. So it's an example of staged terrorism being used as a tool of statecraft in the modern era. I'd be surprised if that bomb attack was arranged by people who live in Northern Ireland or in Ireland. Okay, now, I don't know if you've sat and watched the parliamentary channel for more than about 20 hours at a time. As Bill Hicks once said, I've got to cut that out, right? And I have watched a lot of the Brexit debates, and it became obvious to me that some of the key players, they're not just speaking for themselves or their constituents, they are working for outside interests. And here are a few that I would suggest are agents or working for outside interests. There are a lot more. This is just a few examples. So all of these on the right, I would put these in the category of working as agents of the European Union. Rees-Mogg, I think he's an agent working for the City of London. David Davis, he's just a slimy git, really. I don't know who he's working for, but I didn't trust him as far as I could throw him. And have both sides playing fair. So if you look into Brexit, two of the financiers for both sides are on the screen here. Aaron Banks, who financed the Leave campaign. So George Soros, who's allegedly been, well, the alternative media often criticised George Soros for his dirty tricks. And both sides have been pointing the finger, stating that the campaign of the other side is not fair or it's breaking the law or what have you. So, for example, Aaron Banks, he used money which came from offshore, so nobody knows really where it come from, and it's supposed to be money that was made in Britain. That's one of the rules. Also, you've got use of Facebook, and have they been breaking any laws by using Facebook, etc. Now, I spoke about the Panama Papers in my recent film about Jo Cox. In my opinion, the Panama Papers is all to do with Brexit. Let me explain. If you're a very rich person and you're going to hide money in one of these offshore tax havens, or hide the making of money in an offshore tax haven, how it works is that they will use a law firm, and that law firm creates a shell company or a trust, and money and assets are put in the shell company or the trust. All right, so law firms are a key component to the offshore tax haven racket. And 2.5 months before Brexit, there was a leak from one of the main law firms that work in this field. So this was 2.6 terabytes of data, and there was, I think, over 200,000 financial entities exposed. So lots and lots of wealthy people who had their money in British tax havens were named. And the mainstream media were picking people out like David Cameron's father or Sarah Ferguson or various footballers, etc. So it came to light many of the people who have money hidden in tax havens. Okay, but I don't think that was the purpose of this leak, to expose people within them. My opinion, 2.5 months before Brexit, the intention was to show the world, look at all this uncollected tax sitting here. Look at it all. The British government isn't capable of collecting tax from these very wealthy people. So Britain needs to reform its tax system to get rid of this, to get rid of the tax havens. Oh, and by the way, the European Union want to do that. So it was a pro-EU measure, in my opinion, the whole leaking of the Panama Papers. And you ask the question, who the hell had the power and money to leak these papers? Because the whole offshore tax haven thing works on secrecy. You know, you don't leak this sort of information, but someone had the power and influence to do that. Now, this article written by Jo Cox, because I believe she wrote most of it, was really the key for me to decide what the probable motive for the Jo Cox operation was. Because when the Panama Papers were released, the British Parliament discussed it, and then they had a vote on it to say, are we going to take action because of these Panama Papers in order to sort out the tax haven issue, or are we not? The British Parliament voted not to, right? Most MPs forgot about the Panama Papers then, and they continued campaigning for Brexit, whichever side they were on. But not Jo Cox. She was still banging on about the Panama Papers and tax havens. This is in, this article I think is from May the 11th, all right? Just 1 month before she disappeared. So she says, David Cameron needs to tackle the tax havens in Britain's own backyard. This is why I think that this leak has something to do with her disappearance. Now, when the Panama Papers were leaked, there was an 1,800-word statement given out justifying why it was done, but it was an anonymous statement because these documents were leaked anonymously. So the word John Doe is like an Americanism for Joe Blogs, similar use of the name. So 1,800-word statement. Now, in my film, I suggested that Jo Cox may have been involved in preparing this statement. I'm not so sure now because what I did, I sent the 1,800-word statement to Peter Hyatt. You may have seen him on Richplanet. He's an expert in statement analysis, and he can pick things out. And one of his fortes is analysing anonymous witness statements and trying to guess who has written that statement. So I sent him this 1,800-word statement, and he was in his element. He loved it, right? So I paid him to produce some analysis, and he's produced a 34-page report, all right? Now, I'm not going to read that whole report out now. I will publish it at some point, but just to give you the salient points from Peter Hyatt's analysis of the Panama Papers John Doe statement, this is what he picked up. Now, as I read these out, see if any names spring to mind with regards to these characteristics. The author considers himself an elite or anointed of who must make decisions for others. The author is both experienced and conversant in financial and business dealings. The author is not in poverty. Finance is a priority to this author. The author is frustrated. The author is not a genuine whistleblower and is concealing his real motive. The author likely works with or is associated with a government entity, not a private attorney nor private firm, and has some sort of influence. The author has a pro-European mentality. Time and timing are significant to the author. Personality traits include a strong intellect, education, and a disconnect from human empathy. His view of small versus great, states' rights versus federal, is consistent with support for globalism over democracy. The author expects praise and honour. Anyone care to shout out a name? Tony Blair. Any more names? Kenneth Clark, interesting. Soros, lady at the front, yeah. All good suggestions, I think. I think Tony Blair's been the most common name that people have shouted out in previous lectures, and also George Soros. Some people think that Tony Blair is like a puppet of George Soros, and he's essentially working for George Soros. Personally, I don't know if this is correct, my money is on Soros. And one of the things that Peter picked up on, I said that the law firm is called Mossack Fonseca. So that's the name of two lawyers, Mossack and Fonseca. And Peter picked out in the analysis, he said, does the author have a personal issue or link with Mossack, not Fonseca? So who is Mossack? Jürgen Mossack is the son of a prominent Nazi. Panama tax scam lawyer is the son of Nazi SS officer from dreaded Death's Head Division who fled to South America. So is that the reason? Let's just say it is Soros. I don't know that it is. And we know that Soros is a Holocaust surviving Nazi. Sorry, Holocaust surviving Jew. Well, some people think he was a Nazi, actually. Or in with them, right? So is that why Soros, if this is a Soros document, has an issue? Okay, but can we link, if it was Soros, can we link Soros to Jo Cox? Well, this is Aidan Harris, who works for George Soros's Open Society Foundations. So the Open Society Foundations is an organization run by Soros, which ostensibly is good causes that he puts billions of pounds into, but my opinion is they're social engineering of different types. So Aidan Harris, who works for the Open Society Foundation, states on the website, "The day before the referendum vote, I attended a memorial in London for Jo Cox MP, and a friend of mine and many in our field." So Jo Cox is a friend of many in the field of the Open Society Foundations. So that's a link between Cox and Soros, I would suggest. So let's come on to the film. You may have seen it coming in here. If you haven't seen it, it's a 3-hour long film. Please watch it. You can watch it free online, or it's 10 quid if you want to buy it here. Why is this film so important, and why is the Jo Cox issue so important? It's important to me for this reason, that she is an MP. That's it, right? Because all of those terrorist attacks that I showed you before, that I listed, right? If an MP was to stand up in Parliament and start talking about that and start suggesting that any of those incidents were fabricated, they would be kicked out of their party straight away. So it's banned from Parliament, really, suggesting things are fabricated, that terrorism is fabricated. MPs have to go along with the official narrative of any terrorist incident. So I saw this case as being possible to get MPs interested in it because it involved their colleague. Yeah, it involved their colleague in a fabricated terrorist incident, as I'm going to come on to. So surely there must be some MPs who want to know the truth about this. Okay, because the only route that I can see of preventing fabricated terrorism is to try and get MPs talking about it, so that Parliament can then put pressure on government. Okay, let's go through a few of the points of my film before I come on to the campaign that I've been involved with in order to get this film recognised. The official story, I'm not saying this is the truth, this is the official story, states that Jo Cox was planning to attend this library here, arrived in her car, she drove up this street, and she was planning to meet constituents in her weekly surgery. Before that happened, a guy called Tommy Mayer is alleged to have walked down this road from his house, Gelderd Road, turned right onto Nelson Street, waited here for a while for a car to pull up here, then he's ran down the street, he's then shot her in the head, he's then stabbed her several times, he's then shot her again, he's then walked calmly down Market Street onto Union Street, and the official story claims that he walked up this road and into this garden where he's supposed to have discarded some clothing and then headed off again up this street here, and he's walked for nearly a mile where he's arrested. So he's arrested a mile away from the murder scene. So this is the guy that they arrested, and this is the guy that was seen on CCTV before carrying out the attack, and he was witnessed by many witnesses. The guy who was arrested is Tommy Mayer. He's currently in prison for this crime. The guy who was seen carrying out the attack is a different man. So Tommy Mayer was wearing gardening shoes with steel toe caps. He was wearing a black baseball cap. He didn't have a coat on, and he has a particular walking pattern. The guy who was seen doing the attack had a white baseball cap, had brown trainer type shoes on. He was wearing a jacket and has a different walking pattern and a limp. Okay, so they're two different people, and the film shows why that is. This is the guy that they arrested and is in prison. This is the guy who did the attack. Two different people. And as I say, Tommy Mayer was wearing steel toe cap shoes, and the perpetrator, whatever he did, was wearing light brown or brown light shoes. So I was in touch with a chap who was looking at or analysing all of the CCTV footage, and he's a martial arts expert, and he was telling me that he was looking very closely at the walking pattern on all of the different CCTV images. So I arranged to meet up with him. He's called Damon. You may have seen him in the film. And the first thing that we did was we identified a piece of CCTV that we know is Tommy Mayer. So this is Tommy Mayer walking into the library the day before of the attack. So Damon was able to get a good picture in his mind of Tommy Mayer's walking style. And what we did, we compared this person with all of the other CCTV footage. Okay, so these are all separate CCTV clips. These are still images, but the rest are CCTV sequences. And very simply, the conclusion was that all of the CCTV sequences showing a man in a white or light cap was not Tommy Mair, and the CCTV sequences showing a man in a black cap was Tommy Mair. Simple as that. The walking pattern matched with the man in the black cap. I'll just show you a clip from the documentary.
If we go to the footage of Tommy walking into the library, it's actually very clear footage, which is good, and you can see Tommy's walking pattern. Tommy brings his foot, or the front part of his foot, up at almost a 45-degree angle. So it's quite a high front stride. Due to the pattern of walking, the back part of the heels on his boots would probably be worn down, because he throws the front foot up like that. So the heel hits the ground. That's quite a distinct walk. And also when Tommy is walking out of the library, you see his walking pattern from behind. And as he crosses the road, you can quite clearly see in every stride the front of the foot comes up to this level. There's no splaying of the feet outwards, or there's no inversion of the feet inwards. Tommy has got a very distinct way of walking, and you can clearly see as he walks onto the pavement, he's got much smaller feet. And once again, it's a different walking pattern. If you break it down, slow it down, and go into still frames, you will see that this guy has got a slight inversion with his feet as he walks, okay, pigeon-toed. And the left foot, I've noticed, this is the clearest we have. The left foot slightly swings. It's a very strange walk. So he's not only pigeon-toed, it's got a slight swing to it. It's almost like he throws it. This guy's wearing different shoes as well. Okay, he's not wearing heavy-duty boots. I would say, actually, it looks like this guy's wearing no more than a loafer-type shoe. Maybe a black pair of trainers, something like that, but it's certainly not heavy-duty boots that you see Tommy wearing. You will see, especially after the alleged shooting, as he's walking away, it's a totally different walking pattern. Now, how I've studied Tommy's walking pattern and this guy's walking pattern, they're totally different. This guy walks with what's known as being pigeon-toed. Okay, his feet are inverted as he walks. I also notice a slight limp from his left.
This is Jo Cox's car. The attack has just ended. We can see commotion going on around the car.
When he's walking down Market Street, you can clearly see the pigeon-toed walk, the stride, and mixed in with this, what I believe is to be a sprain, the guy once again has average sized feet. He doesn't have big feet. In my own opinion, the Market Street and Chapel Street is not Tommy.
Now, the most obvious thing that's different about these two characters is the colour of the baseball cap. So the police had to come up with a reason as to why the man they arrested had a different colour cap. And what they said was that the perpetrator was wearing two baseball caps. So he's wearing a black baseball cap underneath this white baseball cap, and as he's fleeing the scene, he takes his white cap off and he chucks it into a garden, even though nobody actually saw him do that. I don't know if any of you have tried wearing two baseball caps. I tried it, as you see. Try going into your local pub with two baseball caps on, order a pint of lager, and see how many people laugh at you. Because the perpetrator, right, is alleged to have been just a few feet from at least two witnesses, 2, 3, 4 witnesses. And none of them said, well, the funny thing was he was wearing two baseball caps. Nobody said that, all right, because he wasn't wearing two baseball caps. So what really did happen? Well, I do believe that the real Tommy Mair did walk down into the village that day, because I interviewed two people who are friends with him and saw him walking past their house. Now, once he's walked past their house, there's really only two ways he can go. He can go to the business park or down into town. I believe he did walk down into town, so he took this route. And you need to watch the film to get the full understanding, but I believe that he was being lured to this particular garden here, and all that is explained in the film. But I don't think he did go into the garden. I suspect he went to his mother's house, just popped to his mother's house before going to the garden. So I suspect he was followed shortly afterwards by the perpetrator down Gelderd Road, who took a similar path. Now, in the documentary, I revealed that in the Daily Mirror, they said that there was a man witnessed with binoculars lying down between two gravestones. The only gravestones that I could find was in the grounds of this chapel just here. So I believe he was hiding behind this wall here. And if that's the case, it would give him a perfect view of Tommy Mair coming down here and then going into the garden. Now, it's stated in that Daily Mirror article that it was a schoolgirl who saw the man with binoculars shortly after the attack. However, if she was a schoolgirl, I would imagine she would be in her dinner hour. School's dinner hour is from 12 till 12:55, all right? The murder occurred at 12:53. So I think it's possible, if she was on her dinner hour, right, we haven't got the name of the schoolgirl, so we can't find her, but if she was on her dinner hour, I think she's seen the man with binoculars before the murder, which would make sense as they were getting their patsy in position before the murder. Okay, the BBC made a documentary all about the Jo Cox case called Death of an MP, which they usually do with these major terrorist incidents, and as always, it followed the official story. It didn't try and find anomalies. It didn't do what journalists are supposed to do and ask awkward questions. It just went with the official story given to them by the police. And here they are. DI Nick Wallen and DS Andy Cass, the Jo Cox bent cops. Now, when I saw this documentary, I realised that both these police officers were lying in their statements. So I transcribed all of their words and I sent them to expert statement analyst Peter Hyatt. Note the shitty blue fleece. You can download the analysis from this link. And when I got the analysis back from Peter, that was confirmation to me from a completely unbiased source, right, that this was a setup and Tommy Mair was innocent. Getting the analysis was confirmation that these two police officers are corrupt and were fabricating and were involved in an operation to frame Tommy Mair. Now, I did want to go and interview Peter with regards to this case. I wanted him in the film, right? He didn't want to go on camera. I don't know why. It may be because he's not happy condemning two police officers, because he does work with police officers in America, because Peter normally will be looking at criminals' witness statements, not police officers. So maybe it went against the grain for him a little bit. I don't know. But my intention was to have him in the film. And we are collaborating on a number of other projects, Peter and I, so I do intend to go and meet him again and record some more footage with him. So in the film, I go through the actual attack itself. So Jo Cox's car was about here. She gets out the back, and as soon as she gets out, she's attacked at this point here, allegedly with a bullet to the head and then stabbed in the chest. And there are many witness accounts that you can find from all of these different vantage points. All right, so there was actually 3 people in this shop here, guy coming out the sandwich shop, woman in the cake shop. There was 2 witnesses at this old people's home. So a lot of witnesses, and despite the fact that there were so many witnesses, there's still some doubt over what really happened, because there are various anomalies. I'm just going to go through them. Firstly, that witnesses described blood but no injuries. I couldn't find one witness statement which described an injury, such as part of the skull coming away when she's been shot, or perhaps clothing being removed in order to stem bleeding, that kind of thing. All you get, she's lying face down with her coat still on and blood, right? So we don't get description of actual injuries. The casualty remained in Market Street for 54 minutes. The ambulance arrived after 11 minutes. And despite the ambulance being there so early, why didn't they take the body straight to hospital? The body was not received by a hospital and instead was driven to London. So this comes from a source who claims that his relative is high up at Leeds Hospital and states that, as I say, the body was not received by Leeds Hospital. The jury were not shown a body, and they weren't even shown photographs of injuries or the body. It's very unusual. It's not unheard of, but it's very unusual for that to happen. Close family members showed no grief at the funeral and at the trial. You've really got to watch the videos of this to understand that, right? Now, when you add all this together, you do question, was she really killed? And in last year's lecture, I suggested that I thought that she was killed. I have changed my stance on this. Andrew Johnson pointed me to a film called The Boston Unbombing, which I watched with interest. So I'm going to digress for a few minutes just to explain what this film is about. Please go and watch it. You can watch it from this link. The Boston Unbombing, in my opinion, is probably the best expose of a fabricated terrorist incident that you'll find, right? And that's probably why YouTube tried to ban it. So the Boston bombing occurred in 2013 at the site of the Boston Marathon. So here's a photograph from that bombing. It looks a little bit gruesome at first sight. You've got blood on the ground and this fence has collapsed and various casualties being treated, all right? So this is where it happened. This road here is where the Boston Marathon runners run down. That's the finish line, all right? So a couple of hours after the winner crosses the finish line, a bomb goes off in the crowd. So there was spectators all along here. A bomb goes off here. A few minutes after that, another bomb went off there. Now, in these neighbouring buildings, there was a couple of people in the apartments who started taking photographs immediately after the blast. One person in this apartment and another one in that apartment. So the person in this apartment took 26 high-definition photographs between 2 and 14 seconds after the blast, and in this apartment, 65 photographs between 19 seconds and 20 minutes. So the main evidence used in this film are these photographs, along with other video evidence and testimony evidence. So the photographs are put in order, and the guy who's made the film, he works out what really happened. You need to watch the film in order to get a grasp of it, right? But nobody died, nobody was injured. It was a disaster preparedness exercise, and they were using all sorts of fancy Hollywood-type techniques to make these injured people look injured. They even used one guy who was already an amputee before the event to make it look like his leg had been blown off. But all kinds of other methods using fake blood and what have you. So there's various types of people identified in this exercise. So you've got the crisis actors who've got, as I say, various types of things fitted to them to make them look like they're bleeding or what have you. So they're lying around the scene pretending to be injured. You've got your first responders who are treating them. And you've also got people which he refers to as set managers. So these aren't directly involved in the actual exercise, but what they're doing is they're walking around the scene looking for members of the public and making sure that they're kept back so they don't see anything or they don't get any photographs, all right? But photographs were taken by these two individuals in these apartments, and the whole thing has been exposed. So if you go on Wikipedia, it will say there were 3 deaths and 264 injured, but there were no deaths. It was a disaster preparedness drill, nobody died and nobody was hurt. So once I watched that and I realised what the extent of faking can be in some of these incidents, and then you then take this into account, you think, was it a hoaxed death? Were they trying to make Jo Cox disappear because she was in danger because of her link with the Panama Papers, perhaps? So I've not been able to find sufficient evidence to show that a death occurred. If you were going to ask me to place a bet, I would bet that she's still alive. But I wouldn't say that strongly. I don't know whether she's alive or not. So can the UK Parliament ever expose a fabricated terrorist incident? I did try in 2012 to bring attention to MPs of the London bombings, which itself was a fabricated event. I'm not saying that no deaths occurred. Deaths definitely occurred in the London bombings, but they were not carried out by the 4 guys that it was blamed on. So I managed to get responses from all of these MPs on the London bombing evidence, and it was clear from some of them that they were sympathetic to the information. I've got no doubt that there are MPs who know what's going on. They know that there's fabricated terrorism going on, but they will not speak about it. As I said earlier, they would be kicked out of their party. Michael Meacher was one example of an MP who did mention or ask questions about 9/11 in Parliament. Now, this is my own MP, Gerald Jones, who I mentioned in the intro there, and I went to see him last summer after I gave my lecture. So I gave him a copy of the lecture, the Jo Cox evidence, and I said, I want a proper reply from you. I don't want you to fob me off. So he wrote me a letter, and in it he states, I have read the information you have sent and watched the DVD you left with me. Given the nature of the matter you raised, you may wish to consider contacting the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Now that's quite a good reply. I was quite pleased with that. He wasn't debunking the evidence, he wasn't trying to fob me off, and he was advising me. So that means he's treating the information in the film seriously, and he believes it has merit. So I wrote to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Now they knocked my letter back because they said, well, Tommy Mair has to apply himself. You can't apply on his behalf. The problem we've got with that is that they're not allowing any correspondence to and from Tommy Mair in prison. And there are other people who have been trying to contact Tommy Mair who've also not got letters back. One guy put a Freedom of Information request in, and he was told that the letters that he'd been sending to Tommy were being put in Tommy's property box. So this is a box. When you go to prison, they take everything off you and put it in a box, and they give you that box back when you get out of prison after your sentence has been served. So they're putting the letter in that box, and he's serving a life sentence. So he's not going to get the letter, is he? So what I did, I rebadged the cover of my Jo Cox film, a slightly more serious cover, in order to send to MPs. It's the exact same film with a different title and a different cover. I've called it the Jo Cox Murder, an Independent Investigation. And I sent this film to every single MP in January this year. So I got 700 DVDs made, and I managed to establish all of the constituency office addresses for every single MP. So it cost me about £1,100 to do this. Thank you. Thanks. So this is my hallway with the 650 DVDs ready to go to MPs. And I deliberately sent them to their constituency offices because there would be less chance of them being intercepted. If I sent all of this to Westminster, then there's a higher chance of them being intercepted. So they went to all corners of the United Kingdom, 650. So every one of these has got a copy of that film. And in the covering letter I wrote, I am the producer of a new investigative film about the assassination of your colleague Jo Cox. Please find enclosed a DVD disc containing a copy of the film. Our production explores the tragic event in detail and highlights serious questions about the circumstances of the murder which you should know about. Now, those DVDs would have been received around the 28th or 29th of January. And I'm convinced that after they landed, a Brexit victim-playing psyop was triggered or ramped up. I think it was going on a little bit before then. Because after I sent these DVDs, I was monitoring news stories on the internet and also Parliament channel very closely to see if there was any reaction. And I'm going to go through a timeline from the 28th of January to the present day, just to show you everything that's happened since every MP got a copy of my film. So this is Tracy Brabin. Now, she replaced Jo Cox as the MP for Batley. She walked into the seat unchallenged. Nobody stood against her. She's a former Coronation Street actress. Now, I've written to her a few times, and in one of the letters I explained that she's got corrupt police officers, Wallen and Cass, operating in West Yorkshire, who were running a corrupt operation, right, framing Tommy Mair. So it's all explained in the letter to her. She's not written back to me. Ask yourself, right, why would they want to put an actress in Jo Cox's place? you see her sitting in Parliament grinning her head off, right? As if nothing's bothering her. And I know the letters that I've written to her. She's got a copy of that film, right? So have they put an actress in that constituency because she actually knows the truth and she knows she's got to pretend that she doesn't know? Are you with me? So there was a chap in the constituency who had my film and wanted to go and see her at her surgery on the 31st of January, and she cancels that constituency surgery. On the 3rd of February, at that time, the main story in the media was all about Venezuela. You may remember it. And this was in all of the press. They managed to shoehorn Jo Cox into this Venezuela story. Jo Cox got nothing to do with the Venezuela issue, right? What they did, they picked up a tweet that Brendan had made on his Twitter page so that they could then put him in and therefore put Jo Cox in and then remind all of these MPs and everyone else the official narrative of Jo Cox. So the stories that I'm going to show you now of other female MPs who were supposedly being threatened by far-right extremists, right? What I think's going on here is they're trying to convince people that that is happening, that there's all these far-right extremists out there who are threatening pro-Remain MPs, right, in order that you accept the Jo Cox narrative because they're worried about the film. So on the 5th of February, I get a letter from the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, and it said that he is looking forward to watching it in due course. Now, if you've been watching these debates, he's been a central figure in the Brexit debates in Parliament. On the 5th of February, man arrested for making death threats against Labour MP. But the death threat was made in 2016. This is the 5th of February 2019. They're talking about a crime that happened nearly 3 years earlier. Here is a news article covering that. Yvette Cooper alerts police over death threat tweet. So here's the tweet. It says, "Hello Yvette, I have received your stronger in propaganda emails 5 times. Please stop or I will kill your kids and grandkids." So that's it there. Not very pleasant, but the point is it was in 2016, nearly 3 years earlier, and they've just gone along to arrest the guy now. Really. So this is where the guy lives who made that tweet in a place called Castleford. This is where the Jo Cox operation happened, ran by DI Nick Wallen, who works at Yorkshire Police Headquarters, West Yorkshire Police Headquarters. So he's just here. So it looks to me like the team who were running the Jo Cox operation just dipped into their files, found someone who had, made a threatening tweet to a Labour MP, just so that they can generate this headline. So they're putting similar stories to the Jo Cox narrative in the media to get people to buy into it. So I then get an email on the 6th of February from 10 Downing Street, which said that your correspondence is receiving attention. I was in the park when I got that email. I came up on my phone. It said 10 Downing Street, your correspondence is receiving attention. And I had visions of me in my mind of Theresa May sitting there with a laptop and a cup of coffee, just sitting watching the Jo Cox film. But somehow I doubt that happened. It might have happened. I have had a few letters of confirmation from MPs, but other than my own MP, I haven't had anyone admitting that they've even watched it. So, as I said, my own MP is called Gerald Jones, and on the 8th of February, I walked into my local pub called the Iron Dragon in Merthyr Tydfil. And this is Gerald here, and this is his partner and parliamentary secretary, Tyrone Powell. And they live together. So Tyrone Powell is standing in this pub. He's pissed as a fart, right? He's wearing a bright pink jumper. So I go up to him, and he recognised me, because I've been to see them a couple of times. I said, "Oh, have you watched the film?" He said, yes. He said, "Me and Gerald watched it on our sofa the other night in our pants." We like to sit and watch television together in our underpants. And then he said to me, "Are you gay?" Right? And then he said, "It would have been good to have you there with us so that we could pause it and ask you questions." And I thought, would that be in the middle between you and Gerald, with or without the pants? Note the shitty blue fleece. But joking aside, he's watched it, so credit to him, right? And he's written me that letter, right? I'm not expecting him to stand up in Parliament and mention it, right? He'd probably be kicked out of his party. But perhaps what we can do is persuade him to talk to other MPs, to get a group of them together, perhaps. So this is an email I received from a Richplanet viewer on the day after, the 9th of February. So this guy was trying to take my film to his MP, and his MP cancelled 2 weeks in a row. Here's another confirmation letter. So the 16th of February, we've got Harriet Harman popping up in these articles, and again, the obligatory picture of Jo Cox. Labour MP had swastikas daubed on her office door, as Harriet Harman claims female politicians have had to move house and hire bodyguards after Brexit vote. So Dewsbury this is, which is next door to Jo Cox's constituency. Again, we've got Harriet Harman. Brexit death threats forcing MPs to hire bodyguards and move home. Picture of Anna Soberry here. Now, this incident where there was some guy protesting to Anna Soberry in the street, there's a video shot slightly later where this protester, he hands something to one of Anna Soberry's employees. So to me, it just looked like a psyop to generate this headline. I think Harriet Harman is important in this because she's the one I think that they're handing this hot potato to, right? Because she's chair of the Joint Committee on Human Rights, and they are going to discuss this whole issue of MPs receiving threats. 18th of February, children as young as 13 joining satanic Nazi groups, report warns. Yvette Cooper, man who made threats, given caution. 20th of February, neo-Nazi terror group National Action was on the rise from spreading racist and hate-filled propaganda before it was banned for supporting the murder of MP Jo Cox. Court hears. Bear in mind, before I've given my DVDs to these MPs, Jo Cox is not appearing in the media every day, right? Now, National Action, one of their members recently was charged with allegedly planning to murder an MP. But the person in National Action who snitched on him didn't call the police. If you know someone is planning to murder someone, you're going to call the police. No, he called or contacted Hope Not Hate. Now, if you follow the work of Dr. Larry O'Hara, you will realise that Hope Not Hate is just an MI5 front. So that tells me that MI5 probably knew that someone was planning to allegedly murder an MP. And again, if you follow the work of Dr. Larry O'Hara, you'll realise that MI5 have been involved in setting up or infiltrating or controlling so-called far-right groups for decades. It's what they do. Terrorist cops arrest man suspected of extreme right-wing activity. What does that mean? And then on questionable time, on the 28th of February, my film gets an airing with this MP, Barry Gardiner.
You say that this is on the left. This is a letter I received this morning. Okay, hey Barry Gardiner MP.
Now, that letter that he's reading there, right, I'd like to see who it's from because I suspect Barry Gardiner's written that letter, right? And he's written it in order to confuse it with my letter. That's my opinion.
Reference your recent parliamentary diatribe, Barry idolising your equally obnoxious Zionist girlfriend, Luciana Berger. Okay, this is one of the racist, extremist letters that I have received from the right of British politics today.
That's not new. I mean, I said this was culturally interesting.
Right, that's my letter there, which he doesn't read.
Again, in my inbox this morning, right, I received the Jo Cox murder, trying to pretend that she was not, this is a former colleague of mine, trying to pretend that she was not murdered by the man who is now in prison for her murder. I'm sorry, that is the sort of racist, awful abuse that we're getting, and yes, there is some on the extreme left, but please don't be under any illusions, it's on the right wing of politics just as much.
Well, I'll get me blue fleece, should I? I'm off. I'm a racist. So I wrote to him, challenging him to a debate on the evidence of the Jo Cox case. He didn't write back. What I think's going on there, right, is they're extremely worried that MPs are starting to see this DVD. And this is a message to other MPs, in my opinion, because if there's one programme that every MP watches, it's Question Time. So it's a good vehicle to speak to every MP. What I think the message that they're trying to put out with this is, if you're an MP and you've had this disc, don't bother watching it because it's some racist, extremist nonsense, yeah? So that's my opinion as to why they did this. And he was probably instructed to do that on national television. So the 1st of March, the Yorkshire Post says abuse of MPs must never become a national pastime after Jo Cox murder. 2nd of March, 2.5 years on from Jo Cox's death, Batley is determined not to be divided by the Brexit effect. Again, the Yorkshire Post says security and safety of our MPs must come first, with no excuses for threats of violence. Then on the 4th of March, John Bercow, who's not supposed to give lengthy speeches in Parliament, makes this speech all about the issue. An attack on one MP is an attack on all, and I won't stand for death of democracy. This was kind of a little plug, a little advert for the programme that ITV aired on the 4th of March called Brexit Online Uncovered. Exposure talks to MPs and Lords who have experienced a barrage of menacing messages and death threats on social media. Really. Now, the thing that stuck out in my mind about this documentary was the fact that they did not mention the death threat made to Stephen Kinnock 10 days after Jo Cox's apparent murder. Why, oh why? Because that guy got, I think, 8 weeks in prison. He's called Gareth Bamsey. He claims that he still works for the government. On his Facebook page, he's worked for 4 different regiments in the British Army, right? And I suspect, and all of the reasoning is given in the film, although I do not know, I suspect Bamsey was involved in the Jo Cox operation, possibly even the perpetrator, right? So that would explain why they've left this death threat out of their documentary, because it's got sensitive information in it. And they didn't, this story wasn't put into the media for, I think, 9 or 10 months after it happened. So it was probably denoticed at the time. So Harriet Harman then writes an article in The House, which is Parliament's magazine, on the 5th of March, where she talks about Jo Cox. Jo Cox was murdered less than 3 years ago, blah, blah, blah. Now, Harriet Harman has a copy of the film. So what I think is going on here is Harriet Harman, we see it here, the committee interview MPs to determine the scale of threats and abuse. So it's now official. It's officially in Parliament. And Harriet Harman is going to reside over this issue as the chair of the Joint Committee on Human Rights. So I think it's possible that MPs may have written to the government about my film in private, right? And I suspect that they're using Harriet Harman as the person to pass that off to. Oh, it's all right, no problem. Harriet Harman's going to get her committee to look at that issue, yeah? So they've got somewhere to send these MPs to. That's just my guess. Now, this committee is made up of half Lords and half MPs. So the MPs have already got the film, so I found out which Lords are on this committee, and they've all got a copy of the film as well, which includes Stephen Lawrence's mother. I've written to her. I've written to Harriet Harman. I've also submitted my own evidence to this Joint Committee on Human Rights, telling them that not to accept the verdict of the Jo Cox, of the Tommy Mair trial, because it's unsafe. And I've also said to them, I'm happy to appear at their inquiry and answer any questions about my research into Jo Cox. So I haven't heard from them yet, but if I do get to appear in front of this panel, it'll make a great Richplanet special. Hopefully. So these stories continued. The 8th of March. Diane Abbott fears she will be raped or murdered by trolls and extremists, and is convinced that a fanatic like Jo Cox's killer has a room full of her pictures in a sexy dress. Diane Abbott feared death and rape threats could come true after Jo Cox's murder. This is a story about what Diane Abbott imagines, or says she imagines. Now then, I listed these terror attacks earlier, and I just want to point a few things out. If we go back in time to 9/11 and work our way forward, at that time, clearly people died in 9/11, and then we go to 2005, the London bombings. people died in those London tube bombings, no doubt about that. 56 died. I consider the Cumbria shootings as a terrorist incident, or a fabricated terrorist incident. Yes, people definitely died then. Now, as we approach 2012, 2013, it all gets a bit different, right? This is when I believe the hoaxing started. So we had Sandy Hook was at the end of 2012, and as I showed you earlier, the Boston bombing was in 2013. So they are cases where it looks like deaths were being fabricated. So I think there was a change of modus operandi around that time from real deaths to fabricated deaths. But I think they've changed their modus operandi again, and I'm just going to point it out. So this film, which I can't overstate the importance of this film, came out in 2016, right? And it revealed what happened in this fabricated terrorist incident. So if you take that time, 2016, and look at the UK terror attacks from that point. Okay, we've got the Jo Cox attack in 2016, the Westminster attack in 2017. That took place on a bridge. Now, if you're going to find a place in London that isn't overlooked by buildings, a bridge is the only place, is it not? You've got nobody overlooking that, so nobody would be able to take photographs, right? We then look at the next UK attack, the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But that was done indoors. Not only that, it was done in an area which was being controlled before the quote-unquote bomb went off. So again, very little public visibility. 2017, we got another bridge. And it was at night, yeah? Finsbury Park, that was at night. So I think from 2016 onwards, they have taken care to make sure that there's no witnesses, because everyone has a mobile phone in their pocket these days, right? So I think around about 2012, 2013, we're seeing more fabricated deaths, and I think we're still having that now, but they're being very careful not to allow people to gather their own evidence from these fabricated terrorist incidents.